Coming up with This Week in Computer Hardware, foldable smartphones, SSD encryption kind of sucks, people. AMD drops an epic server processor, iPad Pro updates, and more. All coming up next on TWiCH.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiCH.
This is TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 491, recorded on November 8th, 2018. SSD encryption sucks. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Expressvpn. Protect your online activity today for 3 extra months free with a 1-year package. Go to expressvpn.com/twitch. And by OnDeck. Are you a small business owner in need of capital today? Well, OnDeck can help. With over $10 billion in loans and an A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau, OnDeck is a lender you can trust. Visit OnDeck.com/twitch to learn more and receive a free consultation with one of their U.S.-based loan specialists. Welcome to TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, TWiCH weekly show that aims to bring you the most engaging, most delightful, most informative, most nourishing, occasionally even the bawdiest hardware news available in this and any unknown universe. I guess it would be this universe and any unknown universe. In any case, babbling at the top of the show aside, I'm Patrick Norton, joined by Mr. Alan Malventano.
How's it going?
A little time laggy, but we're good.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about SSD encryption, the iPad Pro, Samsung's foldable smartphone, 15 terabyte hard drives, and maybe even some console references today. But nothing too bawdy. I mock us with our bawdiness. I just had to put this in because every time I look at it, I am filled with something that almost might feel like technolust. Samsung's foldable smartphone, they call it the Infinity Flex display. And boy, that thing fascinates me. I don't know how else to say it. Not a ton of specs on this.
They're making it look like it's folding in such a way that screen is like a sheet of paper folding.
Sure looks like it.
I suspect there is an opening in the radius of the housing of that thing near the binding there. So that screen is probably not literally folding itself in half like with a crease.
We don't know, and we won't know. And it's funny because there's another one you can kind of see over on the right side that the Verge looked at earlier. But whatever this is, it's a 420 DPI, 7.3 inch, basically 4x3. It's 4x2 by 3, 4.2 by 3. That main display when it's open. When they fold it into chocolate bar mode, it drops down to a 4.58 inch diagonally measured, what they call the cover display, not the main display. It's I want to say 320 dots per inch. Man,
yeah,
I'm really curious about this. Just given that so much media is consumed on phones, this just looks really interesting. No info on pricing, no info on availability. We don't know how long it's going to take to kind of make this happen, but it's really interesting. Because I like tablets and I like looking at bigger screens when I'm, say, watching Netflix while waiting for the airspace to be reopened over Las Vegas. And certainly a lot of you out there consume a tremendous amount of YouTube and Netflix and Amazon Prime and whatever else you like on a mobile screen. And that's really tempting to me, to be able to look at things on a 7-inch screen, but not have to deal with a lunch tray or trying to stuff a lunch tray into my pocket. I'm really curious what what the size of that final foldable phone is. Is it a centimeter thick? Is it 12 centimeters thick? They were getting into a lot of those details, but I think this is going to be the first of a bunch of devices like this we see. I'm curious if they're going to show up at CES, Mobile World Congress. But it's, it was legitimately playing. We don't know if that's the final case. We don't know if that's the final design, but man, it looks good. And the other thing that they were showing off was Royol's FlexiPi, which was the one that you kind of saw on the edge there. You can see it on the right side of the screen right now if you're watching the video, where the screen was folding on the outside of the device. But I have nothing to say other than that I don't usually get really excited about phone concepts, but this one I'm really curious to see in the real world and what the pricing is like. It's tempting. That's not the Samsung, that's the Royale you're looking at right now. If you're watching the video version of this, just letting you know.
Yeah. I think just the key to getting we've had flexible, quasi foldable screens for a while. The key is getting it into something that can have enough durability to where your average person is not going to somehow mess the screen up, right? You need to somehow enclose it, right? If you look at any smartphone right now, any average person's phone does not just have the screen just kind of flopping out there like it's inside something well protected behind glass and aluminum and other things, right? It's a very delicate, at its heart, the screen itself is a very delicate object. You can't just, manhandle the thing and it'll just stop working eventually, right? Despite how you see the hand model person, whoever, flippy floppying around a bare screen, just sheet of paper looking OLED screen. You can't just do that like indefinitely, right? You can't just roll that up and stick it in your pocket and expect it to still work once you've pulled it back out, right?
Well,
we'll get there.
You can expect it to, whether or not, engineering and physics and materials science still apply. We can make that assumption. I'd also like to point out, for those of you who are dealing with winds, it looks like we have another fire delivering tremendous amounts of ash into the Bay Area. So if I suddenly learn panic and say goodbye, it could be because the fire is closer than I think it is. Speaking of fires, to make one of the weirder transitions we'll make on this show, hopefully this year, let's talk about SSD hardware encryption, which everybody's been, I'm selling it, and the storage is soldered down on the motherboard, but I'll just encrypt it before it goes, and that'll take care of everything. And the register does not want you to, I'm just going to read the title, then I want, Alan, I'm going to just step back and let you talk about this. Quote, solid state of fear. Euroboffins bust open SSD BitLocker encryption. It's really, really dumb. And then if that doesn't bring the point home, quote, security experts frantically face-palming at stupid design. Wow.
Yeah. So the Register article is harping on Microsoft a lot. The thing is, though, it's not completely Microsoft's fault. So the paper itself, which is linked in near the beginning of the Register article, very interesting. Basically, they went through some different SSDs some made by Crucial, some made by Samsung. I'm not sure if they just had enough juicy content to make a nice paper at that point and just stopped trying to do other SSDs, or that those two makers were the easiest to get into. But yeah, they were really freaking easy. These guys took these SSDs. In some cases, they kind of probed around and used this thing called the JTAG header, which is like a way to debug hardware. This assumes you have physical access to the SSD, but yeah, you're trying to get into encrypted SSD, you're going to have physical access, right? Well, these guys dumped the firmware from the drives, analyzed it, saw what made it tick, did some reverse engineering. And in a lot of these cases, there were some very simple, one of the most easy cases was there was just a vendor-specific command, which is just pure security through obscurity, right? It's you're just relying on the fact that nobody would know what this super secret command is, right? And if you ran this particular kind of, and if you just happen to know what this command was to send to the drive, and you did so, then it would unlock another set of commands, one of which would allow you to just extract the block of cryptographic data from the drive. In other words, the chunk of information that contains the things like the passwords or hashes that you would need to be able to reverse the passwords and get access to the data and just unlock the drive. Just all around, there was just all sorts of holes that these guys poked. And they just systematically went through, they went through 3 different Crucial SSDs. They went through 4 different Samsung SSDs, very common ones, 840, 850 EVOs. The T3 and the T5, which I think are the most damning of this whole thing, is that Samsung T3 and T5 are external SSDs. Those are the ones that users are most likely to enable the encryption on, because they don't want just someone coming across this drive and just being able to read it. Now, granted, if your average Joe came across this drive, they're probably still not able to read it. They still need to know what the password is. But if there's somebody who knows their way around some hardware, like these guys do, and have any sort of reverse engineering experience, they're going to be able to figure out a way in, right? It's almost like Jurassic Park, right? Like life will find a way. Life always finds a way, line from the movie. That's how security stuff tends to work, right? Like just ask Steve Gibson. There's someone will find a way. If there's a way in that exists, it will be found at some point. It's just a matter of time and effort, basically. And in the case of a lot of these, while these drives are all conforming to some form of a Opal standard, and Opal is just the one of the standards which a host would communicate with an SSD and enable or disable or enter your password for encryption. They can claim to conform to that standard, but if the way they've implemented it is not secure, it might as well not exist, right? And then the part of this that Windows comes into play on is that it's in relation to BitLocker. So if you had an SSD or a hard disk connected to your system that did not support any of these cryptographic standards, any like Opal or any of those things where the drive tells the system, hey, I can do this encryption thing, right? If none of that's there, Windows will just do its own encryption. It'll have to use a CPU. On more modern systems, there's like an AES 256 engine inside, like Intel and AMD CPUs. Like there's commands, it's accelerated, but there's still some sort of overhead. All of your data has to pass through the CPU before it, goes to and from the disk. It's a little bit extra work, which is the part of the reason you want the hardware to be able to do it, right? It's way more ideal if just the SSD can just take care of it. You give the SSD your password, it unlocks it, good. System loses power, drive is protected again, basically. But there's no mechanism to tell Microsoft or Windows, hey, I understand you could do this yourself. I don't want you to ask the drive if it can do it. And if the answer is yes, just let the drive do it. Like, I don't want you to trust the drive. Like with security, usually the best thing is trust no one. And in this case, don't trust anything or trust as few things as possible, right? Mm-hmm. So Microsoft's default in this case has just been, well, if the drive says it's Opal compatible, just, yeah, sure, do that. That's great. And in an ideal world, that should be the right answer. You should be able to trust it. But as this paper proves, turns out, these guys haven't been that great at implementing this. And I wouldn't just, voice caution towards Crucial or Samsung here. Like any of these guys, there's probably vulnerabilities. So we were talking about this on the podcast that Ken brought up a really good point. Like Opal shouldn't just be like this standard that people follow. There should be some sort of a certification, right? There should be some sort of an independent body, probably including guys like this that did this work. There should be somebody that can actually review in confidence the firmware or whatever the software is that's on the SSD that's responsible for handling the crypto. Let someone validate that stuff. Let someone else look at your code. In a manner of which they're not going to redistribute your code, right? And where it's kept in confidence. But
there will
let
be
someone
no
review it.
Just trust us.
Well, I think they really should be doing. They really should be some kind of a auditing mechanism in place here. Just to. In a lot of cases, it's better for any company. Like if you're able to say, "Hey,
I know
this independent guy looked at this."
You're preaching to the choir here. I just find a lot of companies, when you suggest that perhaps they should have their products audited, look at you like you're some sort of magic space weasel that just teleported into the middle of their office and took a magic space weasel dump in the middle of their desk. It's just, I find it unfortunate. I also find companies that believe in security through obscurity to be unfortunate. But look, we've got some sort of Venn diagram of security errors being found in the storage being deployed in laptops. Not like you store important information on a laptop that you might actually want to remain secure, especially in the case of government employees, organizations that are subject to industrial espionage.
Yeah. I mean, it's
saying.
so it's this. It's worse than I thought it could have been. And given that this paper's out now, I really hope that everybody kind of steps up their game and fixes that problem and makes it so that you should be able to trust Opal, right? You should be able to trust a drive that says that it can do encryption. And then when you flip that on, it should work, and it should be harder to get into than just a few security researchers poking around, poking around the parts of the drive that are just accessible generally, right? Just like a JTAG header. Like almost every bit of computer hardware has some form of a JTAG header on it.
It's always awkward. It's not even. I'm okay with security researchers poking around and finding things because some security researchers and pen testers are extraordinarily intelligent and sophisticated. What I have an issue with is somebody downloaded the service manual and through our secret commands.
Yeah, right. In some cases there was just like I think they extracted. It was something like one of the commands, or it just like contained like the email address of one of the guys that worked at the company, and then a long string of numbers. It's just like, yeah, this is just the way in, right? Like this is if you do this, so you potentially making it so easy that in the end, once you've figured out, you might have had to use the JTAG and other kind of creative ways to get to the point of figuring out the exploit. But then once you have it figured out, it's potentially so easy that it could just be run without any special tools, just with the drive connected to a system. You could potentially hit it with these special commands that then unlock other commands that you can issue, and then just the drive just gives up the goods. It's just like, oh, you want my block of flash that contains all the security keys for the drive? Here you go. Like, yeah, it's just no. That's not good, right? It's the same kind of thing that Steve Gibson, when he comes across just this thing that was just like a no-brainer, why were you guys doing it this way kind of thing, it just kind of blows your mind. Like, you don't understand why, but at the end of the day, some of these guys were just trying to get this thing implemented.
Yeah, that's part of the issue. Is I'm in the process, teaching the boys math and teaching the boys to double check their answers and verify. Is something, and to give yourself the time to do that is, I think, critical. And it's critical when you're doing math as an 11-year-old, and it's critical when you're doing hardware design. It's critical when you're engineering hardware implementations. And all too often, it just doesn't get done. And the end result is exciting surprises that make you realize that your secure devices aren't. And that's the kind of surprise I don't need.
Yeah. And just going through some of these, it was to the point where the person responsible for doing the development work at that level, when this thing was, being figured out, somebody in the room had to ask that question, or it should have dawned on somebody, right? Like, well, we have this special command. We have this special command that just lets us into this, and couldn't they just then get this other information and then reverse the password? Like it's there, right? It's just a feature that they had of the drive that they really should have locked that down. It's similar to the kind of things you hear about with backdoors into what's the Intel chipset level thing that was like ring -2 access to the hardware, the Intel management engine backdoors and whatnot, where it was just a thing that they never thought anybody would try to access the thing that way. Again, we're just relying on the obscurity of it. Oh yeah, just nobody would ever figure this out. Well, somebody figured it out. So now they got to fix it. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Our iPad Pro, of course, shipping reviews are coming out. It's interesting to watch the reviews, in part because a lot of the reviews are kind of divided on you believe in the iPad Pro future and you can run your entire personal and professional life off of iOS, or you just want to delete expletive, powerful iPad to consume media and you don't particularly mind about the cost. One of the crankier ones out there, I think, is Nilay's review up on the Verge, and it's interesting because when you look at we talked extensively about the pricing on the iPad Pros. They sent him a model that was, I was going to say they said completely maxed out. Nilay writes 12.9-inch iPad Pro, 1 terabyte of storage, LTE, the optional $199 smart keyboard folio, and the $130 Apple Pencil, which is $2,227 total, which is more than all but one standard MacBook Pro configuration. So it's curious to watch some of these reviews because some of these models are pretty badass, but really it still comes down to, yes, these are faster than last year. If you're looking for the sub $1,000 models, performance I think is going to be in some cases problematic because of iOS. The USB-C is not particularly advanced the way we like to see it. I mean, there was a funny tweet I caught from Tim Stevens, just spitballing here, but it almost seems like Apple doesn't really have its heart in the whole USB-C thing, which is when he was retweeting Federico Viticci, who wrote that the USB-C cable that comes in the box of the iPad Pro cannot mirror the iPad to the external display. It just charges it, which is a little, frustrating.
All that money, all that money you spend on, all that money you spend on it, and they cheaped out a couple of dollars cheaper version of a USB-C cable without the extra data lines that can handle enough bandwidth to to do the mirroring to the display. So yeah. And now, granted, it is a more expensive cable. Don't get me wrong, but it's a very expensive product. Like, that should work. I'm sure there was some bean counter somewhere inside Apple was like, well, 5% of the people tops that buy this are actually going to hook it up to a display, and they were just like, well, then why ship this cable with all of them, right? And the assumption is probably just, if you have the better display that you want to hook up externally, you're just going to get the other cable. Yeah, but most people aren't going to know that, right? Apple sure as heck isn't advertising it. It's someone had to find out after the fact when they actually tried to hook it up. It's kind of a downer, right?
One of the challenges when you're looking at the iPad Pro, because it really is, it's stunning. It's gorgeous. The display is gorgeous. I love the illumination of the home button. I love the rounded corners on the screen. It is stupid snappy, and we'll get to that in a second. But you really have to figure out, a lot of it comes down to whether or not you can do what you need to do in terms of iOS and iOS applications. And, for the people who can do everything they need to do, this incredibly powerful new iPad Pro is probably super tempting. If you're thinking about it as an alternative to a MacBook Pro, you may have difficulty accessing that power because of what apps are actually available in iOS. That's an interesting thing to look at. There's also, Ars Technica had a great walkthrough on the iPad Pro AX12 system on a chip. And one, it was kind of like, Anand, who we missed so much since he left AnandTech and went to Apple. But Anand Shimpi and Phil Schiller kind of walked people through the silicon. And the line that really stuck out from me, the A12X is a pretty big bump over the A12. But, let's quote, "We've got our own custom designed performance controller that lets you use all 8 cores on the A12 system on a chip at the same time. So when you're running these heavily threaded workloads, things you might find in pro workflows and pro applications, that's where you see up to 90% improvement over the A10X processor, which is the processor in the previous iPad Pro." One, it's so cool to see Anand resurfacing, and two, it's pretty crazy when you look at Geekbench scores, and we talked about this a little bit last week, but if your applications in iOS can access it, this is a fairly powerful computer. There's a 2018 MacBook Pro model that's more powerful, but the 2018 iPad Pro outperforms everything you can do with the 27. In terms of all the benchmarks, it is faster than a MacBook Pro. It is faster than a 2016 MacBook Pro, 2017 MacBook Pro. It is, their benchmarks put it at maybe 20, 25, 30%, not quite the 35% single core performance, but it's certainly considerably faster than the 2017 iPad Pro. It's pretty amazing to kind of look at this. There's a tremendous amount of GPU performance in that A12X processor, and I'd like to see whether or not vendors are going to figure out a way to bend that towards accelerating things like Photoshop style photo editing applications. And it's crazy. They are, they're admittedly an Xbox One S class GPU. Pardon me. And it is crazy to realize that, yes, it is, as they claim, like an Xbox One S-class GPU, that's still way behind what's available, for example, on a Windows desktop or a Windows laptop. But again, this is a tablet, and this is a tablet that does not seem to be compromised in performance, despite the fact that it doesn't have a fan, which is something we're not used to seeing on a lot of the fanless, super thin Intel designs. It's pretty interesting stuff. If you're kind of curious, one of the lines that kind of gets repeated into is Apple didn't really want to get into detail on that, which is not a particular surprise if you've been reading about any stories with Apple over the last 20 years. This is, it would be nicer if it was as fast as the Xbox One X, which is 4K. And much more powerful. I'm really kind of curious to see how this works over time and what people do with it. It's a fascinating accomplishment from Apple, and I want to see the applications that are in there, that are available, kind of taking full advantage of what it's available in the processing power on the iPad Pro. I think they'll have to, in order to replace, the MacBook Pros. I'm curious. I just want to say that I'm really curious to see whether or not the software environment is going to kind of fully take advantage of what's available inside of the iPad Pro. The machine learning, the neural network, the GPU performance. There's some really interesting stuff. There's a lot of raw computing power inside of this, and it's not cheap if you need a keyboard, right? That keyboard add-on's $200, maybe $170 if you're doing the smaller of the two 2018 iPad Pros. But I'm really kind of curious to see where they go with the feature set they have stuffed inside of this 7-nanometer processor, this incredible piece of custom silicon. And I'll just stop there. Otherwise, I'll just be repeating myself over and over again. It's a really interesting product. The specs are pretty fascinating. The performance is really intriguing. Now, whether or not that iOS is going to deliver some more of the performance that is available in Mac OS 10, I think is kind of the next step or the next evolution for the iPad Pro, if it's going to be a genuine replacement for everybody that might be normally looking at an iPad Air. So,
yep, there's an interesting trend generally speaking lately with these. You tend to get more compute power than the software needs to catch up, almost.
Yeah.
Right. Like you've got these NVIDIA GPUs, the RTX series. They've got extra silicon that can do extra machine learning related things that kind of not a lot is taking advantage of. Right. Like there's some parts of it. There's other parts that are meant for ray tracing, also not fully taken advantage of. Now you've got this other neural net. The NVIDIA side's just doing it more to try to, do better tricks graphically, like neural related handling of the output to make it more pleasing or effectively equivalent to something that would need way more horsepower to get the same result.
Right.
And now you've got all this neural hardware engine stuff, like extra silicon in all these Apple products that it's like we've swung really far on one side of the chicken and egg problem, right?
It's a really good way of
right. Like you're getting this extra hardware into the hands of lots of folks, whether they need it or not. It's just there, right? And at some point in the future, presumably developers would take more and more advantage of that because you'd have that extra hardware in more and more of the marketplace, or just more and more of the potential users. So. Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm interested to see where that all goes in the coming year, 2, 3. But for now, we've just got, hey, there's this extra hardware in this thing, and yeah, it's an incremental upgrade otherwise. But look at all this neural engine thing that we're barely showing in sort of a demo fashion right now. But maybe might lead to way more powerful compute related things in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know. I got a lot of tweets around this because I been tweeting about this earlier, and one of the things that iOS 13, at C Marathi tweeted out, like iOS 13 is going to be a big deal on iPad, and They had to put USB-C on there for a reason. And we also another great tweet from @Ruari where it's like it's the USB plague. It's still one cable. You never know what's going on. There are 3 distinct flavors. Which one does what? USB-C charge only, USB 2 data speeds only, no USB-C data support, USB-C with USB 3 data support, USB-C Thunderbolt 3 support. And it's true, it's a messy spec on the irritating days, especially if you can't read the little tiny things that may or may not be printed next to the port on your portable device.
That's true.
And while I'm in Twitter, I'll point out that at JGR9 says, quote, they revealed the foldable phone in the dark, and supposedly you can see the gap between screens in the light close up. He also adds, apparently foldable isn't a word. So much spell checking, so much emotional trauma. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by ExpressVPN, which I'm running on a desktop right over here, actually a laptop right over here, not a desktop, because, I don't always like to share everything I'm doing with my ISP. Just because I don't. I'm stealthy that way. And if you travel a lot, if you're a cafe or a hotel, you're using public Wi-Fi, you are, goodness help you, in McCarran Airport right now, Los Angeles, I should say the Las Vegas airport, one of the first airports we saw with free Wi-Fi. I've been running VPN in that airport pretty much ever since forever. And friends of mine who are in computer security are like, don't do that. I'm like, I got a VPN. They're like, okay, but you make a service. A hacker with the right know-how can just kind of sip through your packets, take a look at what's going on, get the Wireshark on, do other things. They may be trying to steal passwords, credit card numbers, personal details, just anything they can grab their grubby little hands on. And some of those grubby little hackers are pen testing friends of mine, but it's really simple. To protect my online activity from spies and hackers and to basically not share what I'm doing with my ISP, I've been using ExpressVPN. Easy to use apps. They run in the background on your computer, your phone, or your tablet. One click to turn on or off. That makes it pretty obvious whether it's on or off. They secure and anonymize your internet browsing. They encrypt your data and hide your public IP address. That's kind of the whole point of a VPN, a virtual private network. You, from your laptop or your desktop, connect to ExpressVPN servers. And everything in between there, they just see a wall of encrypted packets. And that allows you to safely surf on public Wi-Fi, no having your data stolen. It's the #1 VPN service rated by TechRadar, comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, and it's cheap. This level of security is cheap. It's less than $7 a month, people. And, if you want to do something like take a look at Canadian curling sites that are geo-blocked from the United States, you can pretend to be in Canada or any of a number of other countries so you can take a look at what's going on there. Protect your online activity today and find out how you can get 3 extra months free with a 1-year package at expressvpn.com/twitch. That's expressvpn.com/twitch for 3 extra months free with a 1-year package. Visit expressvpn.com/twitch to learn more and secure your packets, people. You're responsible for your safety on the internet, and the VPN's a nice way to do it. And thanks to expressvpn.com/twitch for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. You turn around and there's a 15 terabyte hard drive. Are you excited, Mr. Malventano?
I'm excited for hard drives in general. I'm not excited personally because this is it's 15 terabytes, yes, but it's relying on what's called shingled magnetic recording. So this is meant for data center type places, not just in the respect of, it's a super durable hard disk meant for data center. You could totally use it in your home NAS. No, this is a host managed SMR, which means that you basically need special software, or your software on the host or the server needs to be coded to take advantage of this particular writing method. So whenever you do any writes to an SMR hard disk, it needs to be more of a sequential write. You can't just write things to random places on one of these. It really doesn't like it, and the performance would really not be that great. But as long as you're writing sequentially, you can store, per the press release and stuff, they were saying, 25% more data roughly on SMR versus your standard like perpendicular recording drives that you can do random things on just fine. So Where the standard drives fall right now from Western Digital is 12 terabytes. So if you want like a regular style hard disk, that's the highest they go. I think it has to be an enterprise drive though right now. I don't think they make a 12 terabyte red or anything like that. Yeah, I mean, good specs. Just usually these drives are like lower power style drives, but these particular ones, the HC620 Ultrastar, is 7,200 RPM drive, implying that you'd get faster sequentials and faster seek times because less time waiting on the data to circle around the disk and make it to the read head. Yeah, I mean, we were talking on the podcast last night. This is probably one of the last drives we're going to see, or last like major announcements we should see before we start seeing some form of what's called MAMR, which is microwave assisted recording coming out of Western Digital. Since they briefed us on that like a year back, and it was supposed to be air quotes coming soon. Not here yet, but they're probably just still trying to develop the media to be able to take more advantage of being able to write to smaller and smaller areas on the disk. But the whole shingling thing it's literally just like your roof shingles on your house, right? They're sort of overlapped on each other. That's what the name is for. It's you as it turns out, you can read from a narrower track than you can write to. When you write, there's just this limit where it's the magnetic manipulation of the domains on the platters. It's wider than we can read currently. So take advantage of that. You just kind of like lay the tracks slightly overlapping.
Slightly.
Slightly. Usually there has to be a gap between them. So you go from that to just, well, don't worry about the gap. Turns out that's about 25% worth. Lo and behold, that's how you get your difference in the capacity. So if you take out that 25% worth of a gap and sort of turn it into actually overlapping slightly, then all you have to do when you come back later on to read it is just kind of shift it a little bit to one side so that you're reading the track, the earlier one, not the one that's potentially slightly overlapping it from the next circle around the disk. So a pretty simple concept. It requires more care because you can't just then insert data into the middle of that, because now you're going to risk overlapping something from the other side. And now there's nothing left in the middle, or very, just a really thin sliver of data left in the center there for you to try to read. So, that would just throw a wrench in the works and it just wouldn't work properly. Yeah, good stuff. Good to see the capacities going up. Eventually, it just means that there will eventually be a 13, or they're probably going to skip 13 because I noticed they kind of did, right? Notice there's a 12 terabyte regular drive. There was a 14 terabyte, and now there's a 15 terabyte. So they're doing the elevator button trick. Nobody wants to release a 13 terabyte hard disk. And, as it turns out, you're trusting your data on this thing. Maybe don't go with a superstitial unlucky number with the size of the capacity.
Oh my goodness. In the ever-continuing saga of blockchain, the future in you, IBM and Seagate have teamed up to tackle hard drive fakes with blockchain. That's Nikhilesh D writing up at Coindesk.com. The short version is essentially they're going to log, IBM and Seagate are going to log Seagate-produced drives on the IBM blockchain platform, and the goal is to keep counterfeits out of data centers. And pretty much out of the entire supply chain. I thought it was kind of fun because, we're not talking about banana coin here, but we're talking about an actual company with an actual product trying to secure an actual supply chain. Bigger news probably in the enterprise this week, 15 terabyte Ultrastars aside, is AMD showing off the Zen 2-based EPYC Rome server processor, which is particularly cruel because Intel teased a 48-core Xeon on Tuesday, and then AMD just a couple days later. Well, actually, the next day, AMD shows off a 64-core second-gen EPYC server processor, which, if you can do basic math, has lots more cores than the Intel part. So
it does, and even though we have no confirmation on this at all, but I would imagine some improvements there to the fabric that kind of ties all those cores together, because now this is another generation of this, and kind of one of the downsides to the current generation AMD parts with many, many cores and having a infinity fabric tying them all together has been basically higher latency, right? There's more hops that the information has to make within the package of the CPU. And that's just led to some higher latencies, and latency is generally a bad thing when you're waiting on information. You're just kind of like stalled the CPU and has nothing to do until the new information comes in. So I'm guessing that they've made some improvements there. I have nothing to back that up, but I would be shocked if they didn't, because that was really kind of like that was the main Achilles heel of the current platform. You improve that, you're going to improve a lot of other things are just naturally going to go faster. One would hope as a result of that. Yeah, so one would definitely hope. And also, hey, like that's a pretty small process node that they're on.
7 nanometer?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you say 7 nanometer? Apple and AMD both on 7 nanometer in one episode?
Yeah, but where's Intel with the 7 nanometer? Like, what the heck? Or at least 10? Or yeah. So they got catching up to do, I guess.
They got a lot of catching up to do.
I don't know. Intel has a habit of doing like this leapfroggy thing, right? They're like a big machine, and they kind of move slowly sometimes. But then when they do make the move, it's like this big, swift, just swath of a move that sometimes just kind of like.
You see my pained expression?
Overtakes. Yeah.
This is my pained expression is my reaction to your still enduring hope that Intel is going to leapfrog everything. It's a possibility. I'm just not holding my breath unless they start.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen like in the near term. I'm just saying, if you go by history, it's kind of they get it handed to them for years, and then all of a sudden somehow they're in the lead again on like everything, and then everybody else kind of leapfrogs them again, and it's just like this give and take kind of back and forth thing.
If you're kind of curious,
I'm just glad competition's good, right? So if AMD's eventually going to be wiping the floor with them with processors on smaller nodes and hopefully higher yields and all these other things, then that just means that the prices are going to go down overall, and compute's going to get cheaper and just better for you and me, right?
Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
I was going to say there's an interesting when you start looking at where chip design is going in the future. There's a nice article by Tom Simonite up on Wired. To keep pace with Moore's law, chip makers turned to chiplets, and that last year's EPYC processor had 4 chiplets, essentially 4 components kind of combined on the die, and this last round was 8, and it's interesting when you're looking at the whole idea of advancing the performance. Things are tough, and this article heavily quotes Mark Papermaster, who's the CTO at AMD, and it's a really interesting look. These chiplets, where to keep it simple, quote says Wired, something like high-tech Lego blocks, unquote. And I think, certainly AMD's obviously moved in that direction. Intel seems to be moving in that direction, more at the low end, though, or a somewhat less expensive end, right, where they combined Intel CPU with an AMD GPU. It's really kind of curious to watch how every time we think that the advancement, maybe this is the leap that Intel will come out of nowhere. They'll figure out a way to create the chips they want using, chiplets. But
it makes sense as long as you can interconnect them in a way that's efficient and performant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then it makes a world of sense, because now, you look at that AMD part, and you've got 8 processing, small chips on there, right? And then you've got something in the middle that ties it all together and deals with memory control and things like that, which is actually not even on the 7 nanometer process. I think that's still 14. But all those outer 8 dies on there, those are all doing all of, that's what constitutes your 64 cores there. They're all kind of mixed in there. So if you think about it, you're just trying to make something that has 64 cores. Well, what are the odds that all 64 cores are going to be perfect right out of the, right off the wafer? They're probably not going to be. And so it only makes sense that as you're trying to go higher and higher on core counts, you kind of need to divide the dies up a little bit so that you're kind of spreading out. Okay, now you've only got so many transistors here of which you can have a failure. And if you have a failure and there's a bad die, so be it. It didn't take 63 other CPU cores with it, right? In the process.
Always awkward.
Because that's the realism of it. If you tried to make a 64 core chip and it was all on one die, all it takes is something bad on one of them, and now it's not a 64 core chip anymore. Now you have to sell it as something with fewer. You have to flip some fuses on the core programming of that die and to turn it into something that has less cores on it, and then you're not able to sell that as a part with the maximum number on there. So yeah, it just makes more sense. Especially, it makes it way more flexible for AMD moving forward too, because they're already kind of doing this with Threadripper and Ryzen and whatnot. But like, if you have like this universal chiplet kind of core package thing, then you can make a 4-core system. You can make an 8-core system, right? You can just we'll just make a different interposer board there and just have a different configuration, and we'll use fewer of these smaller chips on there, and we'll just make all the different kinds, and then we only have to focus our effort on the design of that one particular kind of die, right? And put all your eggs in that basket, make that thing as optimized as you possibly can, and then you're getting that benefit regardless of which platform you're putting it on. It's just a matter of, can you connect them in those different ways to work in a server, and then they'll go all the way down to like a desktop and mobile.
The demand for power keeps moving forward. Yep. And chip vendors figure out ways to make it happen. I'm really curious to see what Intel does with this, because they've certainly embraced the basic concept. I'm kind of curious if they're going to do something to get around their stymied attempts to drop below 14 nanometers. It's exciting. And it's interesting to watch. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware brought to you by OnDeck. OnDeck is 100% committed to small business owners with fast, easy, tailored financing. Your time is valuable, right? And money is also valuable. And getting money should not be a long, dramatic, torn up, terrible, just long experience, right? With OnDeck, they're trying to get you funding in as fast as 24 hours. Term loans up to $500,000, lines of credit up to $100,000, none of which require business collateral. The application process is simple. You can apply online or by phone, get approved in minutes. It won't impact your personal credit. OnDeck delivers some of the best customer service with their U.S.-based loan specialists and has an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau. They've lent over $10 billion to over 80,000 small business owners. OnDeck is the secure financing service that business owners everywhere can truly rely on. Their simple and secure web platform and mobile app make it easy to access your account anywhere, anytime. How's that sound to a busy business person out there? If you're a small business owner and need access to capital, go to ondeck.com/twitch right now. And as a listener of This Week in Computer Hardware, you'll receive a free consultation with one of their U.S.-based loan specialists. Apply online or by phone and get approved in minutes. Go to ondeck.com/twitch. That's ONDECK.com/twitch for your free consultation now. ondeck.com/TWiCH. We want to thank OnDeck for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. Goodness. I like the idea that loans are getting less traumatic. I also like the idea that one of my sons is one of his best friends moved. The best friend doesn't do email, does texting, and suddenly, after years of denying my son a phone of his own because all the other kids have one, it's like, do the iPads, do I give my old iPhone? Do we do Android phone? And I had just visions of an 11-year-old child up until 4 a.m. Minecrafting and playing Alto's Adventure. So I was I ducked into Target at a biscuit before midnight, as I often do, because they're open and very little else is around here, and found a Nokia 3310, which, ladies and gentlemen, looks a lot like the Nokias of our youth. And also, just because I'm a mean old man, having my son learn how to text using T9, I think will encourage a certain amount of discipline and brevity in his text messages. But it's a phone that does text messaging. I believe it has Snake on it. There's a particularly awful 2-megapixel camera that reminds me a lot of the very first Nokia camera phone that Leo showed on the screensavers about 8,000 years ago. They are colorful, and they're pretty slick. The Amazon reviews on these are really funny. There's a lot of 1-star reviews, I think in part because A, people couldn't get the color they want, and B, it's not a dual SIM device. Most of the international versions of these can pack dual SIMs. And if you're thinking about like, oh, I'm going to Coachella or I'm going to Burning Man, and I am terrified for my $1,000 flagship phone, this is a pretty, this is a pretty easy substitution. The battery life is pretty phenomenal because it's not doing much. The battery, my son's been getting a couple days out of it before needing to recharge. It's micro USB, not USB-C, but it's also fairly inexpensive. It's not a nano SIM, so you might need a nano SIM adapter if you're currently running a flagship and you want to stuff your SIM card into this. But there's Snake, a timeless classic if ever there was. But I was surprised. If you're looking for a cheap temporary phone, $60 is about as cheap as you're going to get, and you're not going to have to worry about a Android implementation of questionable functionality and even more questionable security. But and it's fun. It feels good in the hand. It's got a replaceable battery. Just the thing if you need a cheap phone and you can deal with the emotional trauma of not having Android or iOS, which for some of you would be pretty traumatic. Just don't expect to take a lot of great photos with it. Just because we just want to point out that non-Apple watches are still available. Fossil Sport, they've got a new, they're basically debuting a new smartwatch, or their sports smartwatch, with a Wear 3100 chip and the Wear operating system. So Android wearables, not dead. And so running the Snapdragon 3100 chip, 6 different colors in 41 millimeter, 43 millimeter sizes. And I think they actually have straps long enough to fit my wrist, which is always a giant question mark. But integrated heart rate sensor, 350 milliamp hour battery. So they're claiming all-day battery life, NFC, GPS. Kind of very curious to see how it works, right? Spotify and Noonlight built in, but it's nice to see some more activity on the Android side. $255 online or at your local Fossil retail location in your favorite mall. But,
it's not a bad price
Android
for a smartwatch.
watches. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's tempting. My problem is still that so many of these, a lot of the smartwatches don't have a strap that will actually reach all the way around my wrist comfortably. And on a completely random note, 10 is now available on all Windows 10 PCs. You can download it from the Microsoft Store. Just wanted to lay that out there. Because I actually have been, because I've been using the Netgear's Orbi. The thing makes me laugh so hard. The whole idea that Netgear actually integrated what they call the Orbi Voice, which is one of their Wi-Fi routers for their Orbi mesh system. But it's got a Harman Kardon designed speaker inside of it, and it works with Amazon ALEXA. I apologize for saying the ALEXA word out loud before. Not the best speaker I've heard, but pretty phenomenal. And for the fact that it's built into essentially a router, it is living in the garage. And I got to say, it is rather bumped up the performance of the internet in the garage, since I was normally just using Wi-Fi from the Netgear Orbi in the back of the house. Although the fact that the Netgear Orbi in the back of my house could reach 25 yards and several layers of sheetrock and construction material and still get decent speeds is still pretty impressive to me. But ALEXA, just popping up everywhere, kids.
Yeah. On Windows. I wonder what the compatible device has to be for it to use the wake command. Like, can you just have a PC with a microphone on it?
Well, some some PCs will actually, some laptops I've played around with will actually respond to ALEXA commands while the lid is closed. You can set them up so that they basically be in an always listening mode.
Yeah.
Should you find that concept attractive? I may or may not find it terrifying, but I work with a lot of security professionals, so the paranoia, it gets amped. PCPro.com, ladies and gentlemen, Alan Malventano's home base on the internet, the home of most of his work. Anything coming up you guys can tease?
Well, I just recorded another mailbag video. So we try to do these mailbag videos like every week. And, people write in questions. And one of us will grab the list and try to go down there. And usually I try to grab the list if it's a, storage-centric group of questions. But try to get some interaction going there. Other than that, we're still making the donuts. Ken's, reviewing CPUs and GPUs, and I'm reviewing SSDs. Trying to think of what's coming up. I'm still working on the crucial P1 piece. Ran into a couple of snags that I've been working with them on to try to recreate a possible bug. But it was only in the smallest capacity of the drive. Probably because my test is just kind of being a little bit too hard on it during the cache test.
Were you being mean?
My test was being mean. I can blame it on my test. Sorry. It just, it beat it up for several hours in a row, and we'll see. Anyway, that's P1's one of those QLC SSDs with an SLC cache. Tries to hide the poor write performance of raw QLC, because QLC only goes like 50 meg per second writes. It's like USB drive speed. But the idea is that you have a bunch of SLC to try to mask all that, so you don't have to, average person never sees that slower speed.
Just saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's, if you're just using it like a regular person and not beating it up like me, it'll be just fine. And those drives the pricing's pretty good on them if you can find them, is the thing. Same kind of deal with the Intel 660p, which is the sister SSD to that P1. They announced it, price looked good, and then you just couldn't find it anywhere. So I guess that's your choice. You either get too good to be true pricing that you can't find, or the pricing is higher and you can find it. Yeah.
So much to look forward to.
Story of the SSD life, I guess.
Well, I don't know. It's a good time to buy an SSD. A lot of good SSDs, a lot of good pricing on that, and they do seem to be.
Oh yeah, stock. Yeah. Right after we talked about the BPX Pro last week, it went on sale for another $50 off of those prices.
Oh wow.
Yeah, the 1 terabyte was an even $200, I think. And that, along those lines, basically, it was 20 cents a gig, if not 19 cents a gig sale pricing. Even further undercutting the equivalent 960 Evo from Samsung, which the BPX Pro actually was beating in a good few areas of our test suite. So definitely worth taking a look at. If the sale's not still going, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes on sale again, because it's that time of year, right? Coming up on all the cybers and the Mondays and the Fridays, and
I'm just laughing because I'm in Amazon right now, and their standard SATA 3 SSD drive, the what they call the Super Boot 2, their 128 or 120 gigabyte drive, is $23.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was just meant to be a budget. Just, hey, I just want a boot from an SSD, right? How low can I go as far as price goes? Yeah, I mean, that's a really low price. Now, granted, small capacity, but to get any SSD at all for that price, that's pretty. That's like thumb drive pricing.
Yeah, the BPX Pro is back up to $259.99 for the 1 terabyte version.
Okay, yeah, but it was for a good few days there. I think it was an even 200. It was right after the last TWiCH, I think. And to which I was like, dang it. But look out for it to happen again. If they did it just now, I'm sure they'd do it again around all the all the crazy sales.
And if you don't need NVMe, I mean, you're looking at the standard 1 terabyte, M.2 PCI Express, like the 3.0 is selling for $220 for 1 terabyte of storage on an M.2 stick.
Oh, you mean M.2 SATA?
Yeah.
You got to be careful with those. Make sure your motherboard is compatible. Always make sure your motherboard is compatible, because some of the newer ones are getting to the point where they don't even care about linking the SATA lines through any sort of multiplexing capability, or just, the motherboard makers. It's to the point where the M.2 SATA is becoming the rarity, and everything is just NVMe PCI Express.
Man, the Crucial MX500, the 500 gigabyte version is selling for $82, $83. The 1 terabyte version is $155.
Is that the M.2 form factor?
No, that's
that's regular SATA 2.5. Yeah, 2.5 inch.
That's still going to be phenomenally fast.
Yeah, I mean, it's still going to be a good responsive thing. Yes, NVMe, those SSDs have a faster straight line speed. There's more convenience. You don't have to hook up cables. You just plug it directly onto your motherboard as long as you have the slot for it. But on the flip side, you can get those SATA devices for cheaper if you're willing to deal with a little bit of cable management and just having a place to mount it in your system. Heck, it's an SSD. You don't even really have to mount it. Like, for the longest time, I'd had
the trauma of running a single SATA cable.
Well, Ken and I did that build like a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, with that micro ITX build. And everything just barely fit in that system. We were thanking goodness that there was an M.2 SSD as part of that build, because by the time we got to the end, we did not even know where we would have put. Like, Ken had said, yeah, just plug in the SATA power cable into the power supply just so that we don't have to try to worry about plugging it in later. And it ended up being this huge pain in the butt of this extra cable that we had to try to find a place to tuck in to some nook and cranny, along with the other cables for the system, because it was just such a tight build. But yeah, I mean, most average Joes just have like their regular old case. I mean, heck, my PC case for my desktop system down here is like an old Lian Li aluminum case from probably over a decade ago, like a standard size case. Probably just fit a whole stack of SSDs in that thing.
I'll send a picture of a case that'll make you very happy.
Oh, just some enormous case. Patrick would have like some enormous, I
do have an enormous case, but I do have one of those cases, the one I use for like the RIP Monster, which I'm replacing the motherboard inside of, which is a nightmare, because literally there's, I want to say 7 optical drives inside of that system, all of which have to be cabled out to them. Because of course the SATA ports on the new motherboard are just moved enough to make everything not fit.
Of course.
That's
just how that works.
Man,
right,
here's Crucial with a 1 terabyte 3D NAND NVMe PCIe M.2 SSD, $220.
Which one? Which model?
CT1000 P1 SSD 8.
Oh yeah, that's the P1 I was just talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. It's a good budget. Good budget product. Especially if
I
you're just doing
sell some plasma.
Especially if you're just doing regular PC stuff, like you put it in a laptop. I mean, yes, the straight QLC speed, if you were somehow able to exhaust the cache, right, it will go slow. But what drives like the P1 do is the more space you have on the drive, it does a dynamic. The amount of cache is not a fixed size. It just does a dynamic thing. So if you had a P1, that was a 1 terabyte you were looking at, right? If it was empty, you'd have a couple of 100 gig worth of SLC, because it just puts it all in the SLC mode, or most of it, because there's just all this extra space. And then as you fill it, it has to start taking away SLC and converting it into QLC, and just so it has room to store the bulk data. But as long as you keep some breathing room on those drives, you'll have plenty of cache available. I think you'll always have at least like 5 gig or something like that. So you need to what?
Oh, go ahead. I was saying the prices on like 4 terabyte SSDs are coming down, but let's not go down that rat hole, because there's still, 4 terabyte
Yeah,
SSD
it's
is still
still
about what I
expensive.
want to pay for an entire PC. But they're
Yeah,
nice.
it's still expensive. I mean, even if the cost per gig is cheap, if you start multiplying by 4,000, it's still money.
Money does have a funny habit of adding up after time.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Mr. Alan Malventano at PCPer.com. You can find his work on storage and all the other things at thepcper.com. I'm Patrick Dorton. You can find me over at TEKTHING. That's techthing.com, the weekly show I do with Shannon. And of course, I get deep into the home theater and audio experience with Mr. Robert Heron. And you can find that over at avexcel.com. And hope to see you there in the future. And as always, you can tweet at Malventano or at Patrick Norton if you got a tech question for us that you want us to answer on Twitch or any of the other things we talk about. But right now, I'd like you to talk to us about hardware. And Malventano or at Patrick Norton are the place to do it. And seriously, thank you so much for joining us. If you've never been here before, go to twit.tv/TWiCH. When I say been here, I mean listen to the podcast before. But if you go to twit.tv/Twitch, you'll find all of our older episodes and information on how to subscribe. Or you can just listen to them right there. Seriously, thanks for being here, ladies and gentlemen. We do this for you. Let us know what you want us to talk about. We'll do our best to point the show in that direction. With that, I'm Patrick Dorton.
And I'm Alan Malventano.
We'll catch you next week on Twitch.